Right. So this webinar is particularly timely today because last week, government organizations, the general public, and media groups all came together to celebrate the annual Sunshine Week event. Sunshine Week aims to bring attention to open access to government records through in-person and virtual discussions. During this week, new ideas are generated to assist government organizations in being more transparent. At Laserfiche, we hear about public records requests during Sunshine Week and year-round from our customers. In fact, it's one of the most common processes that we hear about. From the perspective of a government organization, all agencies are responsible for complying with public records law, but it's not always easy. I've heard stories about requests to produce every single piece of communication sent by a given employee. I've also heard about mass amounts of people requesting information about a controversial Walmart proposal in a small city. And I've even heard of requests to see complaints filed about food that's served in government offices. And agencies want to provide this critical service in an efficient manner, but a combination of hefty requests and limited time and staff can make the process of delivering public records requests very challenging, especially if you have a paper-based process. As one of our customers likes to say, people often think that the government is hiding information. It's not that we're hiding it, it's just that we can't find it. And that's why we're excited to have Julian Alan from the City of Ithaca on today's webinar. The city recently turned to Laserfiche forms to create an easy way for the public to request documents and then an efficient process for city staff to deliver on the request. This new process has resulted in faster response time and an overall improvement in citizen service. So today, Julian Alan will tell us a little bit about the city and the challenges that they face when complying with the Freedom of Information Law. Then they'll tell us about the automated process and the results they've seen from this process. And finally, they'll close with some advice and lessons learned for other organizations looking to implement a similar process. So at this time, I'm going to hand things off to Julian Alan. Give me just one quick moment while I unmute their line. All right, Julian Alan, handing it over to you.
Awesome. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. We'll give you a little hint. This is the first webinar we've presented, so be patient with us. We're really excited to be here, and we think this is a really fun topic. So to give you a little information about Ithaca, for those who don't know, we're located in central New York. We have a population of 30,000 residents and then a student population that matches that, about another 30,000 that live in Ithaca and attend Cornell University, Ithaca College. We also have a branch of Tompkins Cortland Community College located here. We'll tell you that Ithaca is an extremely educated and engaged community who has an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and information. And being a college town with a median age of 22, our residents expect that their government is going to be as technically savvy as they are. So in 2005, we started exploring ways that we could digitize and protect our records while also making them as accessible as possible. We were introduced to Laserfiche through our municipal code vendor, General Code Publishers. And initially, we used it primarily as an internal tool, and it had very limited access to staff. But in 2013, we surrendered our individual licenses, and we joined the Tompkins Shared Services Electronic Records Group. We call it TEASER for short. And TEASER is a group of municipalities all located in Tompkins County who have signed on to a shared services agreement under the auspices of Tompkins County. By entering into this agreement, we gained access to an updated version of Laserfiche, increased server capacity, and also a team of IT professionals to collaborate with. So a little background on my office. In 2014, the City Clerk's Office and the Department of Information Technology merged, and we became the Department of Public Information and Technology. So I'm still the City Clerk, and we have a staff of 7 total. We have 3 people who work on the technology side of things and 3 people who work on the clerk side of things. But this merger really formalized the marriage between records and information management and technology. So we have the information and we also have the tools that we need to provide that to our public. And it really broadened our horizon of opportunities. So, after attending our first Laserfiche and Power conference, we were really inspired and anxious to tackle our first workflow automation project. We reviewed a number of our processes and decided to select one that would have the greatest impact on our organization, and that was our Freedom of Information Law requests. And as you can see, we receive up to 1,000 FOIL requests each year, and in fact, last year we exceeded 1,000, which is a lot for a smaller municipality and certainly small departments, city departments. As New York State's FOIL law became stricter, our city attorney's office had actually taken over the task of coordinating the responses to each request that came in to ensure that we remained in compliance with the law. I'm sure you've all experienced this, that those requests for information are not generally easy, and they can find themselves on the bottom of the pile of your work on your desk. And there are legal and financial consequences for not responding to those FOIL requests appropriately. So we have 11 city departments that are located in 8 separate facilities. And although we have many records that are in electronic format and we have a robust email system, city staff was actually printing off documents and sending hard copies through interoffice mail to the city attorney's office. So depending on when the FOIL requests came in and the timing of different departmental mail runs, that practice was wasting precious response time. It could take a couple of days until departments received the FOIL request, and another couple of days before they found the records, another couple of days before they actually got back to the attorney's office for review. And then, in many cases, a lot of those hard copy documents were actually being scanned back into electronic format so that they could be sent out via email, and that just created a whole lot of redundancies. So this is what our process looked like before we automated it. And you can see where the clerk's office would receive a request. We are designated as the city's records access officer and also the records management officer. And we're required to accept requests via email or paper copies. So we had both. And to keep those straight, and we wanted to log how many requests we were getting in, we also then would take some of that important data and we would enter it into a database. We would make photocopies of the requests and we would route them to the city attorney's office. We'd get a copy of every request, and then we'd also send a copy of the request to the department that we felt held the responsive documents. The city attorney's office would send out an acknowledgement letter. That's one of the requirements of New York State's law, is that within 5 days of receiving a request, you have to acknowledge that you've received it, and then also tell people when they can reasonably expect to get the responding documents. So the attorney's office would do that. The departmental staff would start, the search and retrieval process for records. They would usually print off any records they found or make photocopies of them and send them to the attorney's office via interoffice mail. If departments didn't respond in a timely manner, the city attorney's office would contact them to find out what the status of the request was. So it was a continual kind of tracking process of where everybody was. Once the city attorney's office actually received the responsive documents, then their job really begins, and they have to review everything, determine which information is clearly public information, which information should be redacted because of whether it was privacy laws or personnel laws, and there's a number of different laws that municipalities can withhold certain information for. And then depending on the size of the request and the responsive documents, the city attorney's office might scan smaller requests and email to the requester. We have an internal policy of any request that is 4 pages or under, we send without any fees attached to it, because it's more difficult for us to process checks for 25 cents or 50 cents than it is just to give them the records. And in New York State, we can only charge 25 cents a page, or there's a number of other things that we can do. If researching the records is going to take more than 2 hours, you can do the hourly fee of a person doing that. Or if someone needs a CD or a thumb drive, we can charge them the cost of the actual media that we provide the information on. So there's a lot of different little caveats in that. So they would either make copies of the information or they would email the information to the requester. And if there was a fee due, we would hold that. A lot of times people would say, I don't want to pay the fee. And so we didn't want to make a whole lot of photocopies and then just have to recycle them if someone didn't want to pay $23.75. They might say, I just want to review the records. So then we'd make appointments with them so they could come in and review records and only pay for what it was that they wanted. But eventually a fee would be paid and the request would be fulfilled. So you can see we had a lot of challenges before we automated this process, and receiving so many requests in 1 year really took up the majority of the time of a 40-hour executive assistant in the city attorney's office and a 40-hour assistant city attorney to review all the documents. And even though we had generated a number of generic form letters that were all electronic, each piece of correspondence needed to be customized to each specific request. Waiting for departments to search for and send over responsive documents was time-consuming, and although the attorney's office religiously logged in and tracked the status of every request, things slipped through the cracks. In some cases, timelines were exceeded. So the solution we found was a new automated process. Since FOIL is a universal process that every municipality has to comply with, we recognized pretty quickly that this would be a great project to collaborate on with our partners at Tompkins County and our vendor General Code Publishers. Once we had a basic structure developed, we met several times with key city staff members who would be administering this process to make sure that we were meeting their needs. Alan, who you're going to meet in just a minute, listened really carefully to all of their ideas, their wish lists, and their feedback, and worked really hard to find solutions. Our assistant city attorney noted the other day that she felt one of the keys to the success of this program was that they were brought in really early, which allowed them to assist in the development of the process.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to go into the streamlined process now. As Julie just mentioned, we had success early on because we had a partnership with the clerk, the attorney's office, and the IT staff. It was the 3 pieces that we needed to work together to design out the new FOIL process, ensure that we were meeting the needs of all the departments involved and those departments that will provide information, as well as keeping it simple. So our requirements were to not only meet the legal requirements we had, but we wanted it to be easy for all process administrators, that would be both in the clerk's office and the attorney's office. We also wanted it easy for those who had to provide the documents to find an easy way to do that. Now that could be any staff member in any department, so we couldn't be assured that someone had Laserfiche training or in fact had ever been in Laserfiche before, so we needed to make some easy ways for them to deliver their documents. Additionally, we wanted to make the workflow as simple for ongoing processing as possible, so we designed it so that the workflow consistently and almost exclusively is based upon changes to the metadata of the FOIL request within the repository. That meant that even those that had a lot of tasks in the attorney's office or the clerk's office only required some very simple and short training at the beginning to show how the metadata gets changed, how the values that we can select affect the workflow, and we'll go over some of those in some of the slides as we move forward. And the other thing we wanted to do, going back to our local consortium or the teaser group that Julie mentioned, was to ensure that working with our partners at Tompkins County and some of the smaller municipalities, that this could be a model that the others could use and draw from. So we made the entire process as modular as possible so that the different organizations could use the pieces that were relevant to them without designing an entire new process from scratch. So we wanted to meet all those requirements, and then as you see on the slide, make sure that this is 100% automated and there's nothing else that's going to fall out of the process later because it wasn't defined in the first place. So we spent a lot of time working on the initial structure. As you can see, we broke it into 6 main categories, which I'll go over: the Laserfiche form submission itself, the automatic notifications that the system generates, receiving the records submitted by the various departments, the review process and finalization of those records through the attorney's office, as Julie noted, collecting fees when needed and releasing the records, and then finally keeping the request in the records management module of the Laserfiche system as well. So the first of those process steps is the Laserfiche form submission itself. This is simply a form that we've linked to our city website, so anyone searching the City of Ithaca for FOIL would go to a page that describes the process and also links into the form. So we have several ways which the request could come in. We were hoping that most members of the public would use this online form, and we are finding that that is indeed the case. It's very simple for people to use. They just have to fill out a few fields and hit submit, and the request is into us. However, we do still take in the requests through email or through snail mail or in person. When we receive them that way, the clerk's office staff will go ahead and enter the FOIL form for that user, and then the process kicks off. So no matter how the request comes into us, we start with the form. That saves the request into the repository and then launches the entire workflow. There's just a couple notes on this form I want to point out. I'm not sure if it comes across easily because the picture is small, but down near the bottom of the form, I'm just trying to see if I can highlight this easily for you. We have the what's called the reCAPTCHA feature, which is right at the very bottom of the picture. It just has the user type in the text or the numbers. Very common with online forms. I'm sure you've seen them elsewhere. In addition, we added some custom JavaScript that does not allow autofilling of fields. Both of those were attempts to make sure that it was indeed a person and not some automated process that was submitting the request to us. And those are all features that are available in the Laserfiche form software. Once we have the form submission itself, we move to the second process task, which is the automatic notifications. When we receive an email address from the person making the request, which is most of the time, we can then send out an automatic confirmation, including a unique ID that's assigned to their FOIL request. We'll show that email in just a moment. So that met our requirement that Julie mentioned about having to reply back to the requester that the request was received within that first 5 business day process. In addition, since the forms could be submitted online now, the internal staff, the workflow administrators, needed to know that a new request came in. So the clerk's office would receive an email as well with the information about this new request so that the department would be notified and they could begin acting on it as soon as they got it. I will point out here that it's not a requirement that a user has an email address or that they have to be able to take the records they're requesting in an email format. So if that's the case, we do have the ability to actually go through a hard copy branch or a notification method where someone would be called with a phone number, which is on the form, or through, I guess we do have cases where an actual mailing address would be used as well. But we did also make the workflow account for those hard copy ones as well, again, allowing every request, no matter what type it was, to go through the same process. Now I'll show some examples of the email messages. This is a view of what the requester would receive. As you can see in the subject line, it simply says FOIL request received, and there's an ID number. In our example here, we see it's 2016-0265. So it's simply a year plus the next sequential number of our requests. That is an ID number that the person making the request can use if they need to call in to either the clerk's or attorney's office and ask questions about it. In addition, if we look in the body of the email, they are told what date they should receive a response by. Now that should be 20 business days from the day that the request came in. I believe there's some questions there as to whether it's business days or weekends. I believe I'm counting 20 business days on that one. But the user gets an expectation set as to when they need to send that in. And then near the bottom of the email, they always get a link to the city's Freedom of Information page and form again. So if it was a user who had emailed in a request, for example, they can now find the form and perhaps use that if they do have another FOIL request. Finally, they're always given the contact information and an email address who they can contact for more information, and they receive the attachment which shows what their initial request was. So they get a copy of the form that they either submitted or we submitted on their behalf. This next email on this slide is what the FOIL administrator receives. Comes right to the administrator's inbox with that unique ID number, in this case 2016-0265, which we see in the subject line. The body of the email is a series of instructions, which is just static text. Early on, as we were getting used to the process and our various staff members were learning it, we had some very specific steps here to kind of remind them what the process was going to be moving forward. Now, I don't know that our staff spends any time looking at that, but this can be text that you use depending on who your administrators are or what information you need them to focus on. What we do always add is a link at the bottom of the email to that specific FOIL. Now, we will show in the repository our directory structure in a couple slides coming up. But if they want to go right to this FOIL to work on it, they can simply hit the link at the bottom of the email, go right into Laserfiche through the web access tool, and then they're ready to go. And then finally, we have automatic notifications that go to the departments or those staff members that would be responsible for providing the requested information. So when the FOIL first comes in, the clerk's office assigns it to the department based upon what the request is. Now, as they all flow through the clerk's office, they've gotten very good at knowing whether it needs to go to the police department, building department, planning, etc. We can always add departments after the fact, and there are times when the attorney's office does make changes to that, but for the most part, they just assign it to the departments that are required. That's done through metadata, and we'll show that on an upcoming slide. And then the email goes out to the departments, informing them of the request, and we'll show a copy of that email in just a moment. I do want to point out on these particular slides that this entire departmental notifications section is one of those modular pieces that I was referring to earlier. We invoke this workflow from the main FOIL workflow, and then we pass in the relevant information, the body of the email text we need, the ID number coming through, and even the fact that it's a FOIL versus one of our other processes that we run, and then we can use the same notification for FOIL and other types of permits that we process through Laserfiche forms and workflow. We are using the workflow route to entry folder tool for this, which allows us to create shortcuts to the FOIL within the Laserfiche repository. Now, we only do that for the attorney's office right now because not all of our other departments are using the system currently on a day-to-day basis. But it also lets us set out an email and add a reminder feature. So our departments, if they have not responded yet, will get a reminder message every 5 days for 3 complete cycles. So that'll basically give them 15 days to get that information into the system. It's all automatic. No one in the attorney's office or clerk's office needs to remind the departments to do that. The workflow is taking that work for us. And this is the example of what the departments see. So again, we always put the FOIL ID number in the subject line. In this example, it's number 2015-999. It always includes the actual FOIL form itself or the request, as well as any attachments that might have been submitted with it. So in the example of us getting an email, for example, they'll get the form that the clerk staff filled out, as well as a PDF copy of the email. The reason we do that is so that the staff member can see exactly what they need to provide just by opening the email. They don't need to go into Laserfiche to find out what the request is. Now, in this email, we also include a link at the bottom that shows a form that users can go to, that's our internal staff members can go to in order to provide that information or those responsive documents. That is another Laserfiche form that will kick off a Laserfiche workflow. For those who are paying attention to the link rather closely, it's also embedded with the FOIL ID number, submission date, and due date. So basically, as long as the staff member clicks that link, all they need to do is go ahead and then click the link, and they can just start submitting their information. They don't need to look up the ID number and type it in. We've tried to make this as easy as possible for any staff members that would want to or need to provide these responsive documents. And here's where we get into the actual directory structure we're using in the repository, as well as the form that these departments see. If we look at the structure first, we'll see that everything to do with FOIL comes into this internal organizational documents folder. We have a breakout of completed FOILs, which I'll reference later why we would want to keep them there and easy to find, as well as the existing FOILs. In this case, our example highlighted shows FOIL 2015-123 with the name Pat Public next to it. Now, I will note that that came as a request from our users in the system after the fact. Originally, we had designed it to only show the ID number, and when there were 1 or 2 FOILs, that was fine. It was very easy to know which was which. As the numbers grew, or if you had 10 or 12 or 15 or more active FOILs at any time, then it became much harder to remember which was which without looking into a daily report or going back to those emails. So we incorporated the name of the requester in that folder structure. I know that our clerks and attorney's office members have found that much more useful in finding the FOIL and keeping track of one versus the other. when the request gets to the departments, as I said, they can go to a form and send that information directly into the Laserfiche system. When they do that submission, their documents, their attachments, whatever they have added, goes into that incoming folder that we see right above that Pat Public folder. The administrator from the attorney's office is then notified that a form has been filled out, again, what the ID number is, and when it was filled out. So they can basically keep track of all the incoming information and then review it and move it into the FOIL as appropriate. We did originally talk about moving those documents automatically into each FOIL folder, but we did worry that there was the chance that the attorney's office staff would not see them as they came in, and then they wouldn't be able to mark them as being completed or being reviewed. So it was a process choice that we had them all go into the incoming folder, and then the attorney's office would move them into the FOIL of that, the FOIL folder structure as they reviewed it. Something else I should point out on the folder structure itself, if we look on the right-hand side of the image, there's two folders that are automatically created, one called Raw Documents and one called the Final Responsive Records. Both of those are created by the workflow at the time that the clerk's office assigns departments to that FOIL. So visually, we know that if a FOIL request has those two folders, that it has been assigned to departments and it's been released to the attorney's office to start reviewing the documents as they come in. If those folders are not there, then we know it's sitting at the beginning waiting for the clerk's office to process it. So it's a nice visual, even though we get an email that comes into the clerk's office when a new FOIL comes in. As you know, sometimes our mailboxes get very full very fast. It can be possible to miss those sometimes, or someone's out and someone else is covering and they don't see them right away. Well, anyone going through the FOILs not seeing those two folders created is going to know that that's waiting for us to process, and we can pick them up that way. It's very rare that that happens, but it has been something that we've done, and it's been a good, nice check to make sure that all the FOILs are being processed when they come in as quickly as we can to ensure that the departments and the attorney's office have as much time as possible to process the actual request. The other thing that administrator can do, in this case it's going to be primarily out of the attorney's office rather than clerks, is that we create a daily status report. In fact, we update it twice a day that sits in the main FOIL folder. That is a fillable PDF that the workflow populates with any pending FOILs. It shows the FOIL number itself, who requested it, and when it's due. So any day or any time that the administrators need to, they can open up that PDF and see which FOILs are coming due, and if indeed there are some where they're still waiting on responsive records for, maybe they need to get on the phone and remind some departments or ask them to go ahead and process that so we can get these responses back in a timely manner. Traditionally, that would have been one of our points of failure in our old methodology. It was very difficult to know which FOILs needed to be completed that hadn't been done yet, or to make sure that the departments were getting those reminder messages in a timely manner so everything wasn't done last minute or right before something was due. So we do send out those automated emails, as I said earlier, and our attorney's office staff can now have one place for the people where they need to give a quick call to and help them out through that. Once the records have been submitted by the departments, we get into our fourth process step, which is the records review by the attorney's office, and then finalizing those records. As I said at the beginning, all this is done through metadata changes. They only have to type something if they have a specific comment or remark that needs to go out to the end user. So as we're looking at this slide and the metadata fields here, I'll point out the very first metadata field is called FOIL dispositions. These are the legal text that we've determined need to go into the emails that go out to the individuals. In this case, you see it references a fee waived and a personal privacy. The administrator in the attorney's office can go ahead and select as many of these dispositions as they need. We have a list of about 14 or 15 of them right now. They're just pulling the main topic here. The actual text of the legal language that we use is stored in a SQL database, which is linked to the workflow process. So workflow will go ahead and pull that text based upon these drop-down selections in the metadata. That ensures that we use the same language consistently and with every request that comes through that has that particular option that it needs checked. As you can imagine, though, sometimes there are some very specific remarks that need to be used or need to be sent to the user, especially if it's a denial or a partial grant of the FOIL request. And that's what that remarks field right under FOIL dispositions does. And then Julie mentioned earlier, there are some times when there is a FOIL reproduction fee. That would also go into the metadata, so nothing is left out of the process. Finally, the delivery method, in most cases, is set to email, but we can set that to hard copy where an email address is not available. And then the FOIL status is set on that bottom line of the metadata. Our general FOIL statuses are granted, granted in part, denied, or no responsive records. As the administrator in the attorney's office sets these values, we wanted to make sure they had a chance to review it before any emails went out to the requester. Again, this was not in our original first go at it, but it quickly became apparent from the attorney's office side that they wanted an ability to review the information prior to it going out to make sure that they had everything selected that they thought was applicable. So that was a user suggestion that we incorporated into the process early on. We handled that by using a workflow segment, and that's what's on the left side of this screen, which populates a sticky note onto the FOIL request. For those who are frequent Laserfiche users, you know a sticky note is one of the ways of annotating a document, and this will put in to that annotation what those dispositions are, the actual text that's pulled from the database. It will show the number of attachments that will be coming if there's multiple records. It shows what the fee will be and what the disposition will be. So even though it's not the final formatted email, it does show all the pieces of information that will go into that email. If there is no fee required or it's a simple email response, once that email is approved that we saw on that previous screen, the system will generate the email, send out the attachments, and it goes right out to the end user, so the request has been fulfilled. In the case where we have fees or potential fees, or in the case where we have that hard copy, meaning we don't have an email address to send, to send to, we have built a routine here that allows a document to be picked up and or paid for. We've broken our fee out into two basic types, and in fact, the second type is a fairly new addition to our workflow. We have a basic fee, and that's what Julie was referring to earlier, about 25 cents per page, number of pages that it might be, so a user can get an email or be contacted over the phone with the information that it would cost some amount of dollars that must be paid before the documents can be released. By simply setting the metadata as paid, they can go ahead and then move it to the next step and then again, either email the information out or produce the hard copies and have it ready to be picked up. There are times, however, where it's not just a production fee of a certain number of pages, it's more of a staff fee. It's going to take a certain number of hours to pull together the information that is requested. That could often be the case with a large email search or a video or media search. A good example for us would be video that's collected on our police officers' body cameras. There's going to be time involved in pulling the video, doing any redactions that may or may not be needed, and then producing it on a device, a disk, a CD, a thumb drive, something that's going to be able to be given to the person. So a custom fee allows for a more specific piece of text there in that case. In either event, it waits for the fee to be paid. Once the attorney's office marks it as paid just by changing the metadata field as paid, they can then go ahead and produce the output and then, again, email it out or go ahead and wait for it to be picked up by the person making the request. And that finally, an example of the letter that the requester does get, in this case for someone who does provide an email address. Again, they get an email with the subject line always showing their ID number, and then the first paragraph in the email says what their status is. Your FOIL has been granted in this case. We always want to show that ID, and we always show the status, and this is all text that's generated by the system. The only thing that would be custom to any particular request is that remarks field we saw before. In this case, the remarks field has about halfway down the page. We really enjoyed searching our dusty basements for these records. Now, I'm sure no one else has a basement like that, but in our case, that might be a little understatement. But the rest of the email is all pulled from the databases generated by the system, static text, standard text, used every time to make sure we're consistent. Again, they're told the number of messages they'll get. If they have multiple attachments, they will get multiple email messages. That's a way of dealing with limitations of file size and email systems. In addition, we continue to show the link to the form itself where someone can submit another FOIL. So if it did come in through paper or through an email, they again have a chance to see that there's an online form that they can use. And again, we always have the FOIL ID number in case they need to contact someone about that request. And it seems to be cut off on the screen, but the email address and the phone number from the attorney's office would also be at the bottom of that email, so they always knew who they need to contact. And now we're to the last step, which is the FOIL has now been fulfilled, whether it had been denied or granted. Now we want to make sure we're keeping that FOIL for the required time, so the Laserfiche workflow will move it into our Laserfiche Records Management module. So that module is set up, as you see in the graphic on the left-hand side, the one labeled 04-409 FOIL request. That comes out of the New York State MU1 Records Retention and Disposition Schedule, which indicates the minimum length of time that officials of cities, towns, and villages must retain their records before they can be disposed of legally. Counties in New York have a different rule set. Obviously, if you're in whatever state and system you're in, you will have different requirements as well. But you set up the records management based upon your local laws and rules, and then it just moves the workflow into that section. That ensures that it's not changed in any manner by users of the system, and ensures it's not accidentally taken out of the system or removed. I just want to point out real briefly that if someone appeals a decision that's been made, meaning if they don't like their denial or they don't like a fee, they can appeal. That is still a manual process. We do use the records management module to freeze the record. We basically, that's the Laserfiche term of putting on a legal hold, and then the attorney's office handles the appeal process. As you can imagine, each appeal has its own requirements, and the data in the system's not changing, so the workflow really wouldn't have anything to do at that step. But there are certainly instances when the appeal would happen. And with that, we've come to the end of the actual process and to the results that we came up with.
So I think you'll find our results were pretty stunning, saving over 7,000 staff hours in the first year of doing that. That was a combination of the hours that we saved for the executive assistant in the city attorney's office, the assistant city attorney, the city clerk staff, and the departmental staff. And by taking snail mail out of the equation as much as possible, or interdepartmental mail, and walking things back and forth to different buildings, we shaved multiple days off of the process, making it a lot easier to comply with all the FOIL timelines. Another key piece to this is, and I think that you'll find as you formalize your FOIL procedures, staff becomes very reluctant to release documents without putting people through the FOIL process. And that's not something that anybody wants. So one thing that we did, we worked really hard at trying to post all of our clearly public information on our website and via web link. We have all of our meeting minutes, our budget information, plans and studies, our police blotters, everything that we know is automatically going to be granted through the FOIL process. As much of that as we can make accessible to the public without having to go through the process, we certainly want to do that. And we learned, as Alan had stated throughout a couple of his slides, we learned a lot of lessons through this process. A lot was that we really had to sit and listen to staff because they had great ideas, and we wanted to make sure that every change we made to the system was an improvement, and we never wanted to step backwards. We're really fortunate to have a shared services group that we can share our ideas with and we can collaborate with, and we would really encourage you to consider a similar model. If that's not possible, I will tell you we've also learned a lot by attending the annual Empower conferences, taking advantage of all the training resources that Laserfiche makes available, reaching out to our vendor when we had technical questions. General Code Publishers has been great about that. We would encourage you to take every advantage that you can of all of these resources. We also, if you do develop something similar, and we are happy to assist. We want you to know that straight out, and I think our contact information is available to you. We are happy to share lessons learned. We're happy to share some of our techniques or ideas and talk through processes with you and why we made certain decisions and why you may not want to. If you did this, we would suggest that you really encourage your staff to make sure they use this automated workflow and the FOIL system via kind of subverting the system and sending emails directly to FOIL administrators or people in offices. That way, the process can still advance, even though someone, left the office for the day or is on vacation for a week. You want to make sure that this is always moving, and that is one of, part of the beauty of this process is that it's not dependent on any single person. We would also tell you, to offer maybe a little word of caution about focusing too much on creating efficiencies. Sometimes they result in unintended consequences. For instance, we learned that by allowing information in forms to be repopulated by hitting a back browser button, chronic requesters can submit a dozen FOIL requests in under a minute. And that's, one of the things that we've had to deal with here in Ithaca. We have people that really love our system. So what's next? We are really looking forward to the deployment of Laserfiche 10.1. We think it's a great product, and we know that it's going to make life a little easier for all of our users, so we can't wait for that. We're going to continue on doing our back file conversion of paper records into digital format, as well as importing our existing electronic records into Laserfiche, because we want to ensure an even easier record search and retrieval process. It is so awesome when someone's looking for a contract or they're looking for something from minutes that we can go in and do a search through our Laserfiche records and find it in a matter of seconds while you're sitting at your desktop and you're not searching through the basement or going through filing cabinets. We love it when that happens, so that is definitely a priority for us. We'll also be exploring some online payment options for those FOIL requests that result in fees. And we'll also start conversations maybe about automating the FOIL appeal process. We haven't completed that yet, but I think that that's something that we will be taking a real look at. So I think that's it for us, Katie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julian Alan, for that wonderful information and for also being willing to chat with anybody on this webinar that would like to learn more. As Julie mentioned, contact information is available for both Julian Alan as well as myself and my colleague Ryan Park here at Laserfiche. So if you have any questions following this webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out. We will be sending an email within the next couple of days here with a link to the webinar recording as well as a link to the Solution Exchange article that highlights the process that Julian Alan covered today. So there are more resources coming. We do have about 7 minutes here left for questions, and some questions have already started to flow in. Just a reminder, you can submit your questions using the Q&A box in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. To start with, we have a question from Matthew that says, did you see an increase in revenue from requests, and did the constituents make any comments about how easy the new system is?
Well, I'll tell you that our constituents have made comments about how easy it is, and as Alan noted, we only have about 5% of our FOILs now are coming in either in person, handwritten, on paper, and even via email. Almost everybody has converted over to using the Laserfiche form, which is awesome for us. I don't think we've really found any increase in revenue as a result of this because we're finding that it's a lot easier to respond to these FOIL requests, and a lot of our requests, probably a majority, are police reports. They're usually under the 4-page kind of minimum that we've said we're going to give for free if it's under 4 pages. So I would say our revenue generation has maybe increased because our number of FOIL requests has increased, but not significant. It's not a significant revenue fund.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is from Crystal, and she's asking, are the records that need redacting done directly in the Laserfiche repository?
Most oftentimes, the request for information results in PDF documents. Either they've been printed to a PDF or that's just their final form anyway. Unfortunately, you can't do the redactions of a PDF directly in Laserfiche. So our attorney's office, who does most of that work, will actually pull them out to work on them locally, use the PDF editing tools that Acrobat offers, and then go ahead and put them back into Laserfiche. Now, I will note that these documents could be converted to Laserfiche pages, which would then allow you to do full redaction within the system, but then they would just get converted back to PDF to send out through an email. So rather than have these documents go under a couple different conversions, we felt it better to keep them in the form in which they were supplied. If it's a PDF or Word document, or Excel spreadsheet or whatever the case may be, we didn't want to tamper with the original file type.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Alan, from Robin. I know you touched on this briefly earlier, but she was asking, is there ever an issue of the attached documents being too large to email?
Absolutely, that has happened from time to time. More commonly when it's a planning type document, environmental study, something that has hundreds of pages. So I've been working with the attorney's office as of late to actually find the documents that are getting too large and working through the Adobe tool set to reduce their size. Sometimes you can use their tool set to compress or change the resolution on the images that are in the document. Sometimes you have to break those documents into sub-pieces with, a section of the pages in each one. It hasn't been a huge concern yet. I think, as Julie had pointed out, that the vast majority of our requests are police reports or similar smaller documents. But yes, there certainly are ones that are large, and for those moving forward, we're going to be looking at some sort of delivery system a la a FTP site or a Dropbox account or something that lets the user pick up the document. We would send them the link rather than the document themselves, which is a workaround. At this time, it happens, but it's not a common occurrence, so we're still handling on a case-by-case basis.
And there's actually another question that relates to your response here. Bruce is asking if you have WebLink, and if so, have you considered producing the documents on WebLink as opposed to email attachments?
We have talked about that, but it's not always a simple matter of a document that's open to anyone to see. Case in point, these police reports, you wouldn't want to put them on a public website that someone else could accidentally find, even if it's not a published link. There'd certainly be some confidentiality issues that we wouldn't want to deal with. In general, however, what we have found is that there are certain record series that should absolutely be made public, and we do put those on web access whenever we can. That way people don't have to foil that type of document moving forward. So that's how we're taking advantage of the WebLink side.
Great, thank you. Another question from Bruce is, where are you getting the sequence number part for your FOIL ID? Are you using an external database?
In fact, we are. So as much as possible, we're pulling information from a SQL database. For the ID number, it's simply a 4-digit year at the beginning, then a sequential number thereafter. So we have a database of basically one record. It's got a year field and a number field. When our new request comes in, it checks, first of all, to make sure it hasn't jumped to January 1st to see if that year needs to change. If it does, it changes it automatically. And then it simply increments that counter, saves the new value back into the database, and then uses the existing number to rename the request folder and the request itself. You could also use the Laserfiche form itself. It does have an ID number associated with a form submission. You could use that. We preferred to have a sequential numbering. That's why we're doing it that way. I will also add, in terms of SQL databases, anytime we're emailing staff members, those email addresses are also in a SQL table. So whether it's our FOIL administrators or our departmental contacts who are providing the records, we're pulling their email addresses from a database so that at any time a department can give us an additional person to email to, change who's getting the request. We don't have to worry about reprogramming or changing the workflows themselves. We're just changing the data side, and it's automatically seen the next time the database is pulled.
Great, thank you so much. Looks like we have time for one more quick question. Katie's asking, how do you tag departments to receive FOIL requests? Is it by users or by groups?
We're tagging departmental, we're tagging the departments that should have the responsive records. Each department has told us who should get those requests. So we'll tag the police department, for example, and they've given us the email address or addresses in their records unit that should get the request. Now, it may turn out that each department has an administrator or a centralized staff member who is taking the request and then distributing it as needed. But we don't have a specific user name for every request coming through. So by departments keeps it very manageable for our end of things, and then as different staff members in departments have different roles on different projects, they can decide amongst themselves what they needed to or who really was responsible at that time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much, Alan and Julie. It looks like we're running out of time here and aren't going to get to quite all of the questions, but again, feel free to contact me, Ryan, Julie, or Alan directly if you would like some more clarification on your questions. Thank you all so much for your time and attention today, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.